everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 eyeshadow palettes that I'm glad I skipped out on in 2020. These are all palettes that were released in 2020, I believe. I mean, 2020 was a blur. Let's get real. I can't even believe that it's January 2021. It still feels like March 2020. But regardless, I wanted to share with you some palettes that I decided to skip out on. These are things that initially they really caught my eye, they really caught my attention. These are things that I was really interested in and they did intrigue me, and I did feel a compulsion to add them to my collection, and yet I did determine that they didn't make sense for me and my collection, and I wanted to share with you the reasons why. And this video is really exciting because it is a collaboration with my friend Kelly. Her channel is Kellie Nicole. I highly recommend that you go and check her out if you haven't yet already. She also has a panning Instagram, which is Kel Pans. I'll have all of her information linked in the description box. Definitely go and check her out. She is so fun. She does tons of eyeshadow related content. She really is into indie eyeshadow, I feel, in comparison to myself. I think I have more of like a mainstream kind of eyeshadow collection, which I'm hoping to change, but I feel really inspired when I watch her videos because she does amazing color pairings when it comes to eyeshadow looks. And I just feel like she has this really amazing eyeshadow collection and a great taste in makeup in general that I absolutely adore, and I'm super inspired by her. And I love the way that she does her videos too, because I feel like she's just real. Like, I personally, this is an aside, but I personally enjoy videos where people do kind of chat a little bit more. They're not heavily edited and they're just themselves. I love her channel for that reason. Like, you can see her true personality and you can just kind of see, like, she kind of gets into different trains of thought, and I tend to do that myself as well. So I see a lot of things that I personally enjoy, and I see in myself in her as well. And if you like my channel, you like my project panning kind of content, you will absolutely enjoy hers as well. So definitely go check her out if you haven't already, and let her know that I sent you. But why don't we just hop into all 10 palettes that I wanted to share with you today. I opted to go for these in alphabetical order because I honestly couldn't pick an order to put them into. If I could figure out how to do them chronologically, that would have been amazing, but yet we're here doing them in alphabetical order. So why don't we just hop on in? So this first palette is by Aether Beauty. This is the Joshua Tree palette. It is technically a limited edition palette, but it has been available for quite some time, and it is all mattes. It is gorgeous neutrals and jewel tones, and you know I love grungy jewel tones. I love muted but vibrant jewel tone kind of shades. That's my thing. So when I saw this palette, it was like my idea of the perfect matte palette. It is so absolutely stunning, and I still really want to try out the Aether Beauty eyeshadow palette formula, and I thought this might be the introduction for me personally to the brand and to their eyeshadow palette formula, but I have opted to skip on this because it is so stunning, but it doesn't give me the option to try out multiple formulas from the brand. They have shimmers and metallics that I am very curious to try out because they speak to them in this way that is so magical, I suppose. Like, they say that they have crystals and gemstones in their formulas, and something about that just really speaks to me and really excites me, and that's really what I want to try out from the brand. And as beautiful as this palette is, the Joshua Tree palette really is absolutely stunning. I think that I would love to see this kind of palette with some metallics and shimmers in it, and that would just be my perfect dream palette. And Kate Marie Beauty over on Instagram, I'll link her in the description box as well, she did actually compare this to Subculture, and the mattes in Subculture and this are very comparable, although not identical, very, very similar. And so it just really solidified for me that this wasn't something that I needed in my collection, although my golly, she is beautiful and I really did want it, but I just realized it doesn't really make all that much sense for me and my personal collection. Next, let's get into a palette from Colourpop. I actually have two here. This first one is so freaking cute. This is the Child palette. This is a mostly green palette with a couple neutrals, and as much as I initially was really excited by this palette, this was a launch that I decided against. And I have decided against a lot of Colourpop releases. In fact, The only Colourpop products that I brought into my collection this year were the Pretty Fresh foundation and the eyeliner, which I purchased on Ulta before Ulta stopped shipping to Canada. And then the Raw Beauty Kristi palette, which I was gifted by my friend Libby. So I haven't added any new Colourpop products to my collection really that much this year because I'm just kind of over it. I feel like this was such a fun and exciting release, and if it came from any brand other than Colourpop, we would still be seeing it promoted pretty heavily on their socials, but this has pretty much disappeared from Colourpop. And although it is so cute and it's so fun and I feel like it's themed very, very well, it's something that the brand has already just kind of forgotten about. And so initially I thought it was really cute and I was really excited and I thought it might be something I wanted, but then I realized it's not anything that the brand even cares about. I really feel a big disconnect from Colourpop as of late because I used to be so in love. I wanted to try everything because I felt like they were excited about their releases and about their products. But as of late, I really feel like they're not. Like, it's just a way of pushing out products to make money and to drive interest. And it's just, that doesn't connect with me anymore. And quite honestly, even though the packaging is really cute, I'm not the biggest fan of The Mandalorian, not gonna lie. Like, I watched the first season, I watched a handful of episodes in the second season, and it's kind of one of those shows that I am a little bit indifferent about. So really, when it came down to it, I wanted the green shades in this palette more than I wanted anything else about it, and the cute illustration. I really like that. But I can dupe out these shades in my own collection, or I could pick up maybe a handful of singles if I felt like I absolutely needed those shades, but I don't really feel like I'm missing out on anything by skipping that palette. And then one other Colourpop palette that really caught my eye this year as well is the Wild Nothing palette. This palette, I feel like it came out after Colourpop had been maybe on a bit of a hiatus from over launching products, or maybe it was just a time where I kind of had stopped looking at the brand and stopped keeping up with what they were doing. But I believe there was a short period of 2020 where Colourpop had slowed down releases due to the current situation. And through that period, I actually felt a lot of relief not seeing things from them. And then I think this popped up and it was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. It's so cute. Look at all those beautiful wearable shimmers and gorgeous mattes. But when I started looking at it a little bit more analytically, I was really drawn to the way that they presented the palette as being like this like desert theme. They had like cactus and succulents in the product shots. And I was really just drawn to that. And then I actually looked down at the palette and I'm like, well, this palette kind of dupes itself out 100 times over. It has 12 shades and honestly, it could have been like a 4 or 5 pan palette and been fine. So when I really look at the palette, I realized that not only is it a palette that kind of is pretty lackluster in my opinion, but it also is really catered to a very light skin tone, like a light to medium skin tone. And I'm just not here for that anymore. I'm so over brands creating palettes that are a bit more exclusive. I think that you can create palettes that will work for any skin tone, but that doesn't mean that they have to work for every personal style. So I think that that's something that I really want to move forward kind of looking at, is making sure that things that I want to talk about on my channel and to recommend and just to like honestly to promote and to spend my money on, I want them to be things that everyone can use in some capacity if they so choose, if they wanted to. This palette wouldn't work for everyone. It just wouldn't. It's so light and the shades are so muted. It just is not inclusive enough in my opinion. Next up, we have a limited edition palette from e.l.f. This is the Retro Paradise palette. This palette looks really cute, and when I first looked at it, I thought actually I could create a wide variety of different looks from this. Even though it is mostly a warm neutrals palette with a couple pops of color, it still does look like it has enough diversity and enough range of those metallics and mattes that it could be something that you could create a lot of different, unique, fun looks out of. However, really thinking about it, I do have the e.l.f. and J. Kissa to the Rescue palette, which is nowhere near the same color story as this, but I would imagine, and I could be totally wrong, but I would imagine it's probably a very similar formula, and I truly wasn't really impressed by that formula. It's not a bad formula. I still have that palette in my collection and I still do reach for it, but it's not something that I love. I really feel like it kind of fell flat for me. And even if the price point is low, I still want good quality products. Like, I don't want to justify something being lackluster because of the price point. No. That's just not me. If I'm gonna spend my money on a product and if I'm gonna own it and have it and hopefully reach for it, I want it to be a good product. So I just feel like, based on my experience with the e.l.f. and J. Kiss It to the Rescue palette, I don't necessarily think that this would make sense for me and for my personal taste, but it does look like a really cute palette, and I thought it was a really fun release from them. And this next palette is by Juvia's Place. This is honestly the only Juvia's Place release of 2020 that caught my eye, and that I'm surprised by, because they used to be a brand that consistently I was so excited about. This is the Wahala palette. This is a really pretty palette. Like, I will not deny that packaging is stunning. I love the backdrop that has multiple colors. I feel like you don't really see that in palettes. We usually just see one flat color as the background behind all of the pans, but I like this. I think this is fun. This is different. And their artwork is always so beautiful. But when I look at this palette, initially I was like, dang, she's fun. That is so cute. But there are 3 pressed glitters in here, which I'm just like not even interested in trying. I've never tried a pressed glitter formula ever. No interest in doing it. Not at all. Not even a little bit. And then I really looked at all of the shades outside of those 3 pressed glitters, and they are beautiful. There is a really good range of different types of shades. I love that there's some warm tones, there's some cool tones, there's mattes, there's metallics. There's really a really great mix of everything. However, the shades that do catch my eye the most are shades that I feel like I have in the Magic Mini palette, which is also by Juvia's Place. Like that matte red, although it's not the exact same, that shade is in the Magic Mini. There is that like green gold kind of metallic as well. Same thing. I feel like I have basically that same shade from them. And then there's also like a purple blue metallic, almost duochrome sort of shade. I have that already in the Magic Mini. So I just felt like when I started looking at this palette, I feel like the brand could have done some more interesting and unique to their own lineup sort of shades. And although those shades may not be exact dupes to the ones that are in the Magic Mini, now when I look at this palette, I really think I already have those colors. I don't need them again in the same formula or from the same brand. So I decided to skip out on that one, and I'm glad that I did, because I love on my Magic Mini palette so much, and that may have taken away from some of my love for that palette or my energy that I can give to that palette. So I'm glad I skipped out on that one. This next palette is one that I was anticipating so much, and I was so excited to see this released and to see the reveal of this palette. This one is by Melt Cosmetics. They came out with a collection with Beetlejuice. It was a collaboration, and I love Beetlejuice, and I just love that idea of Melt and Beetlejuice doing a collaboration, because I just felt like they would do this collaboration justice. They would do it phenomenally, spot on. Packaging on this palette, this is the Recently Deceased palette. There were 2 palettes in this line, but I want to talk about this one specifically. This one is like amazing. The packaging, so beautiful, but the inside, it makes sense. It does make sense for Beetlejuice, but it just kind of was like a little bit too making sense. Like, I felt like they could have done something that was a little less predictable. The greens are beautiful. Greens are beautiful. They do great with greens though, so I would imagine that these are kind of shades that they already have within their own line. Like the 420 palette that came out this year, I feel like has some of these shades already. Purples, I'm not familiar with the way that they formulate purples personally, but look at this lineup. They're all almost the same. They're all like this red-based purple, and that just seems a little bit boring for me. I wish that there had been more of like a deep plum purple and maybe more of like a light pastel gray lavender purple to really emphasize that recently deceased kind of tonal shades, and maybe even like a pop of blue or like a navy, something to really deepen and ground this palette and give it a little bit more interest. I just look at this palette and I feel like it could have been so much more and so much more interesting, and unfortunately it just didn't cut it for me. And next up, let's talk about Natasha Denona. I feel like this brand released so much this year compared to years past. I don't know why. I feel like they're really pushing out new releases, and there have been some really beautiful releases, but I just can't even believe it, especially considering they are a luxury brand. I would imagine that they would continue at the rate that they have been in the past, but whatever, and it must be doing okay for them. At least they're not at the rate that Colourpop was, so I'm okay with that. But the first palette I want to talk about is one that initially I was really excited about. This is the Glam palette. This is a mostly cool tone. I wouldn't say it's all cool tones, but mostly cool tone neutral palette. I will say so many people love this palette. This is a palette that I've heard raved about, but it does look a little bit boring to me. And that's because these metallics I feel like are very similar in tone. I feel like there could have been more of a range of depth and maybe a little bit more of a hint of color. Like instead of that being just a true silver shadow, maybe a more slate kind of silver where there's like a hint of purple or blue behind it, just to create more interest and more depth, I think would have been beneficial to this palette. And then I have to say it, I hate the naming conventions in this palette so much. I cannot believe that this brand decided to just take the route of not only being lazy, but also being not inclusive and naming the shades based on their intended purpose. Personally, I don't think that makeup should have any rules. I hate the idea of there being like an eyeshadow called Transition, because I'm not going to use it that way per se, and probably a lot of people aren't going to use it that way, and some skin tones can't use that as a transition. That might be the shade that they use to set down their primer or concealer on their lid and then build a look on top of that. And I just feel like that was such a lazy move. Ugh. My own opinion, but yeah, that just kind of irked me, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But it does look like kind of a cute palette, but I'm glad I skipped on it. I have absolutely no need for that in my collection, but initially it was kind of like, oh, kind of fun, kind of different to see released on the market, but not something that needed to come on the market in my opinion. And just as an aside, with this palette and with all the other palettes, if you have it and you love it, good for you. I'm so glad that it worked for you. I just wanted to talk about the reasons why I decided that they weren't something that added value or made sense for my collection and my taste. But the next palette is also by Natasha Denona. This one is the Triochrome palette. This, in theory, could have been such a cool palette in my opinion. In theory, it really could have been a gorgeous, unique luxury palette filled with fun, colorful, editorial, shifty, multi-chrome goodness. And yet it only has 3 chromey, shifty eyeshadows and the rest are mattes. And like the matte selection is pretty, but again, they run very, very light. These are the kinds of shades I believe that they kind of anticipate you would use as transitions alongside the metallics and the chrome shades, but there could be so many more interesting colors in this palette than there are. When I think about multi-chromes, I do often think that they come in singles, so you do have to use some sort of palette as a companion to them or other shadows as a companion. So I understand what they were trying to do here is they were trying to have it kind of like all in one. But I still feel like when I look at this palette, I would need other palettes to create looks that were really interesting and more diverse than what this palette can offer. And I just wish that they had put maybe half of these as shimmers and half of them as mattes and kept some of those fun, bold mattes. They're really cool. They are really interesting, but I want to see more of the shifty chrome shadows. That's what the palette is about, in my opinion. So I feel like this just wasn't quite there for me. It wasn't quite enough in terms of offering the metallics and the multi-chromes. and it is really pretty and it's fun and it's funky, and I think that it's really interesting coming from a luxury brand, but for me personally, it wasn't everything I hoped and dreamed it would be. It just wasn't, unfortunately. This next palette, when it first released, I honestly thought this was a Natasha Denona palette. I thought it was something comparable to like the Metropolis palette. This is the NYX Ultimate Utopia palette. This is so pretty. Look at these colors. There are metallics, there are mattes, there are cool tones, warm tones, colorful pastels, there are warm, delicious browns. There is such a good, diverse range of shades in here, and I feel like this color story is stellar. This is so good. It's very inclusive, and yet it's also so vast that it can work for so many different personal styles and tastes. But it's by NYX, and I don't mean to say that in a way that's like rude, but my experience with NYX shadows has not been great in the past. So when I realized this was by NYX, it was like, unfortunately, a no-go for me, because this is $50, which is really expensive for a drugstore brand. You are getting 40 shades in this palette, which is great. But $50 is very, very high. And with the experience that I've had with NYX shadows in the past, I can't justify that. I've had NYX singles in the past that were just very underwhelming for me. And then I did have the Ultimate Brights palette, which some of those shades are hard to formulate, but I just did not enjoy that palette as much as I was hoping and dreaming I would. And I just worry that if I were to pick up a $50 drugstore palette, it needs to be like stellar. It needs to be the shit, honestly. And I just worry that this wouldn't be that. If this was a color story that came out from Natasha Denona in their 28 pan palette series, and she did this exact color story, but obviously a bit more pared down, I would 100% buy it, and I'd probably buy it for over $100 and not think about it because the formula I knew would be good. But with this, I just don't know the formula, and I'm not willing to risk it, quite honestly. And the final palette that I have here is one that, I drooled over for quite some time. This is the Urban Decay Stone Vibes palette. She is so beautiful. Like, the packaging is so cute on this, but also just look at those metallic pans. It looks like you could like dive in and swim in them. They have so much depth and so much shine. They look, delicious. But I decided against this palette because after hearing several different takes and different reviews and opinions on this palette, it kind of seemed like it was something that was a little bit more hit or miss. Some people absolutely loved it, and some found it a little bit boring and a little bit uninteresting and really difficult to apply. And I'm glad that I waited to hear some more reviews from people who weren't sent this in PR. Not that I think PR can affect everyone, but I do think that when you do receive something that's new in PR, you can be influenced to get a quick review out, and you don't really put a product to the test per se. And when I saw a lot of people who really had an opportunity to put this to the test in not such a rush and weren't sent this product by the brand, I didn't hear as great of things as I had been hoping I would hear. And also, when I really look at this palette, all I want is those metallics. Like, those look like such beautiful shimmers, and I feel like they added the mattes in really for no real reason at all. I can't even say it. It just makes no sense to me. I can't even express it. The mattes just are there because it feels like they're supposed to be there, I guess. And honestly, in my opinion, maybe they're just there to fit the brush in there. But I'm glad I skipped out on this. I do have metallics in my collection that I absolutely love. I don't really need any more shades like this or formulas like this in my collection. And I would be buying this a lot for the packaging more than anything else, but it is really, really beautiful. So that is all 10 palettes that I'm glad I skipped out on last year. These are palettes that I'm sure if I did add them to my collection, I would have been very happy with them. I would have been impressed by the formula or the color selection, or maybe I would have got to know them in a way that I can't through pictures and through other people's testimonials. So they would have been potentially really great palettes, but I am ultimately happy that I skipped out on them, and I'm glad with and really happy, actually very, very content with the eyeshadow palettes that I did bring into my collection last year instead of these ones. So I'm not trying to upset anyone. I really don't want to offend you if you love these palettes, truly, truly. It's just about my own collection. But I am really looking forward to hearing what Kellie has to talk about, which palettes she's going to share with you today in this video as well. So I cannot wait to watch her video. Definitely go check her out if you haven't yet already. That is going to be everything for today's video. Thank you so much for watching and for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye everyone.